It was just another quiet evening in the heart of Los Angeles, when the city's hustle seemed to slow down for a moment. The lights of the towering condos reflected off the glass buildings, casting a soft glow on the streets below. Keanu Reeves, the kind of actor who preferred to stay out of the limelight when he wasn't working, had just finished a long day on set. The stress of filming and the chaos of the movie world seemed miles away. The only thing on his mind now was getting home to the peace and comfort of his luxury condo. He parked his car in the underground garage as he always did, and started the familiar walk toward the lobby. Dressed casually in a worn leather jacket and jeans, with his hair still slightly messy from the day's work, Keanu didn't look like a man who had millions of dollars or the kind of fame that could stop traffic. He looked just like anyone else, a regular guy coming home after a busy day. As he approached the front door, he noticed something odd. 2 new security guards were standing by the entrance, glancing at him like they hadn't seen him before. They didn't recognize him, or maybe they just didn't care. Keanu's footsteps slowed as he got closer, unsure of what was about to happen. One of the guards stepped forward, blocking his path. Keanu raised an eyebrow, unsure whether this was part of some new security protocol. The man was tall, his uniform crisp and professional, but there was a certain tension in his stance. It wasn't the usual warm greeting that Keanu was used to at his building. He couldn't help but notice the firm look on the guard's face. "Sir, residents only," the guard said in a clipped tone. His voice was firm but not unfriendly. Keanu's first instinct was to chuckle, thinking it was some kind of misunderstanding. But then he saw the seriousness in the guard's eyes. "I live here," Keanu replied, his voice calm and steady, not revealing any frustration. It was the kind of tone you use when you've been through moments like this before. But instead of stepping aside, the guard only raised his chin as if to say, "I don't believe you." Keanu looked around, almost expecting someone to step in, someone who could vouch for him. But the lobby was quiet and only a few residents were walking in and out, none of them seeming to notice what was going on. The silence felt a little heavier now. The guard was still standing in his way, and Keanu wasn't sure whether this was an unfortunate mistake or if they really didn't recognize him. The second guard, standing just a few feet away, didn't say anything at first. He simply watched, his eyes scanning Keanu up and down, likely trying to process the situation in front of him. Keanu had been through this sort of thing before. Sometimes it was the new staff at the building who didn't recognize him, or sometimes it was just someone doing their job too strictly. "I think you might want to check the resident list," Keanu said softly, his voice still calm. "I'm in Unit 1507. The first guard hesitated for a second before shaking his head. "Sorry, sir, but we need to see some ID. We can't just let anyone in." Keanu felt the faintest trace of frustration, but he hid it well. He had lived in this building for years, always keeping a low profile. He had never once had any problems getting into his own home. Today, however, felt different. Something wasn't right, and the longer the guard stood there without letting him in, the more uncomfortable the situation became. Keanu glanced down at his jacket, wondering if he had any form of ID on him. His wallet, of course, was in the car, parked just down the street. That was the last thing he had expected to need. He considered calling the concierge, who knew him well and had always been respectful and helpful. But just as he was about to pull out his phone, he realized the situation was already getting too tense. The last thing he wanted was to make a scene in front of anyone. The guard, still looking unconvinced, glanced at his partner again, as if waiting for some sort of confirmation. Neither of them seemed ready to let him pass without proof of his identity. "I don't have my ID on me right now," Keanu said, maintaining his composure. "But if you check the list of residents, I promise I live here." But his words didn't seem to carry the weight he thought they would. The guards, still standing their ground, weren't ready to back down. Keanu, in the back of his mind, started to wonder whether they really didn't believe him, or if it was simply that they were too new to know who he was. It wasn't long before some residents walking through the lobby noticed the scene unfolding. They were staring, clearly curious about the conversation, and a few even slowed down to listen. Keanu could feel the eyes on him. He didn't want to cause a spectacle, but the longer this dragged on, the more uncomfortable it became. One of the residents, an older woman, stopped and whispered to her friend, pointing in Keanu's direction. Another resident, a man in his 40s, looked directly at the guards and shook his head. "Hey, what's going on here?" the man asked, approaching the group. Keanu smiled at him, grateful that someone had noticed. The last thing he wanted was to be stuck in a situation where he had to explain himself over and over again. The resident's question broke the tension and gave Keanu a moment to gather himself. Before he could say anything, the guard who had been speaking to him took a step back, looking flustered. "I'm sorry, sir, but we just need to make sure. We've had some issues with unauthorized access before." Keanu nodded, understanding the concern. He knew how important it was to keep the building secure, but this was getting out of hand. The idea that he was being stopped like this, treated the same way as someone who didn't belong, didn't sit right with him. The two guards stood there, unsure what to do next. Keanu took a deep breath, trying to stay patient, but it was getting harder to keep calm. It wasn't the first time he'd faced some level of inconvenience or confusion because of his low-profile approach to fame, but it was certainly one of the more uncomfortable experiences. At this point, Keanu could feel the weight of the situation building. He wasn't used to being recognized for his fame in such a negative way, especially in a place he had called home for so long. Yet somehow he stayed composed. As the minutes stretched on, he found himself wondering how this would end. Would the guards ever believe him? Would someone step in to help? And would this whole thing really be worth the effort of fighting for entry into his own home? The minutes felt like hours as Keanu stood there, patiently waiting for the guards to figure out what to do. He could feel the tension in the air growing thicker by the second, as the awkwardness of the situation seemed to hang over the lobby like an invisible weight. The sound of the occasional elevator ding or the soft murmur of residents passing by only made the silence feel more pronounced. Keanu's calm exterior barely wavered. He knew he couldn't force his way in. There was no need to escalate things. The guards, after all, were just doing their jobs. He had to respect that. But part of him couldn't help but feel frustrated. He had lived in this building for years, never once causing trouble. He knew the staff, the concierge, even some of the residents by name. The idea that these two security guards, who were just following protocol, had no idea who he was, felt like a strange and almost uncomfortable reminder that fame didn't always help in everyday situations. As he stood there, watching the guards exchange unsure glances, a thought crossed his mind. What if they really didn't know who he was? He had never put up a big front or tried to stand out. Keanu never demanded special treatment, never used his status to get ahead of others. Maybe that was why the guards couldn't recognize him. His understated approach to fame meant he didn't fit the usual stereotype. He didn't walk around with an entourage or make a grand entrance like so many celebrities. But still, this felt different. This was his home. He glanced back toward the front door of the building, almost hoping that someone would come through who could help him, someone who knew him, someone who could vouch for him. He could see a couple of people glancing over at the scene, but no one made a move to intervene. He tried not to let it bother him, but a small part of him wished someone would step forward and make things easier. He didn't want to make a scene, and he certainly didn't want to embarrass the guards. But this was starting to feel like an unnecessary complication. The guards, still hesitant, turned to each other again, exchanging words too quiet for Keanu to hear. They seemed to be debating their next step, unsure whether to let him in or ask for more verification. Keanu, trying to stay patient, decided it was time to speak again. "I understand you're just doing your job," Keanu said in a calm voice, his tone sincere. "But I really do live here. You can ask the concierge or check the list. I'm in Unit 1507. I've been here for years." The guards both looked at him, but neither one moved to let him through. It was clear they weren't convinced. Keanu could see the struggle in their faces. They didn't want to seem like they were being rude, but they also didn't want to make a mistake. Their hesitation was understandable, but it was beginning to feel like a deadlock. Just when he was about to say something else, a voice interrupted the uncomfortable silence. "What's going on here?" The voice was familiar, and Keanu turned toward the sound. A woman who lived in the building had just stepped out of the elevator. She was in her mid-30s, casually dressed, and had a friendly smile. Keanu instantly recognized her. She'd lived in the building for a while and often greeted him in passing. He wasn't particularly close with her, but she was a familiar face in the lobby. The woman glanced over at the security guards and then back at Keanu. There was no mistaking it. She recognized him. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, but she didn't make a big deal of it. Instead, she walked over to the guards. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, looking between Keanu and the security guards. The guards looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable. One of them cleared his throat before speaking. "We just need to verify that this gentleman lives here," he said, his tone apologetic, but still firm. "We've had a few issues with unauthorized access recently, and we can't be too careful." The woman raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem particularly surprised. She probably had seen her fair share of new security staff struggling with the rules. Still, she turned to Keanu, giving him a warm smile. "Don't worry," she said kindly. "I know him. He lives here. He's in Unit 1507. I see him all the time." Keanu smiled back, relieved that someone had stepped in to help. He appreciated her calmness in the situation. The guards, looking slightly embarrassed, turned to her for confirmation, and she gave a simple nod, reinforcing her earlier words. "Okay," one of the guards said, visibly relieved. "Sorry about the confusion, sir. We just have to be sure." Keanu nodded, trying to keep the mood light. "No problem at all," he said with a smile, letting the tension ease a little. "I understand. You're just doing your job." The woman gave Keanu a nod of acknowledgement and then turned to the guards. "I'll vouch for him," she said. "Let him through." The guards, now realizing their mistake, stepped aside, and Keanu, with a polite nod, walked past them toward the door. The whole encounter had been awkward, but it had been resolved without too much trouble, though it wasn't lost on him how strange it felt to be questioned, like that in his own home, as Keanu stepped through the glass doors and into the building's lobby. He felt a sense of relief wash over him. He was finally through and the encounter was over. But the moment wasn't lost on him. There was something unsettling about the fact that this had even happened at all. He had never once been treated this way in his building, not by the longtime staff or even the residents. He could only wonder what had gone wrong. Keanu pressed the button for the elevator, still thinking about what had just happened. It wasn't just the fact that he'd been stopped at the door. It was the idea that the new security guards hadn't recognized him at all. They didn't know him, and they had no reason to. But in some strange way, it made him feel even more like a stranger in his own home. The elevator arrived, and Keanu stepped inside, hitting the button for the top floor. As the doors closed, he leaned back against the wall, taking a deep breath. The day had been long, and now this little incident had added a layer of frustration to what was supposed to be a peaceful evening. He had been caught in a moment of doubt, one that, despite all his years in the building, reminded him of the distance between his public life and the privacy he tried so hard to maintain. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, but it was the first time in such an intimate setting. His home, the one place he thought he could always escape the noise of the world. The elevator doors opened, and Keanu stepped out onto his floor. The hallway was quiet as usual. No one else was around. He felt a bit of weight lift off his shoulders. It had been an odd, uncomfortable moment, but it was over. Still, he couldn't help but reflect on how strange it felt to be treated like an outsider, in a place that had always felt like his sanctuary. As he walked down the hallway toward his condo, Keanu couldn't help but wonder how the rest of the evening would unfold. Would the guards recognize him tomorrow? Would they apologize? Or would this just be one of those things that faded away with time? Only time would tell. As Keanu stepped into his apartment, he let out a long, tired sigh. The familiar silence of his home wrapped around him, and for a moment he felt like he could finally relax. He slipped off his jacket and hung it up in the hallway closet, then wandered into the kitchen. The soft hum of the fridge was the only sound in the apartment as he opened the door and stared at the half-empty shelves. He wasn't hungry, but the motion of pulling out a bottle of water helped ground him. It had been one of those days where nothing seemed to go quite right, and the incident with the security guards had only added to the exhaustion. He took a few slow sips from the bottle, standing by the counter thinking about what had just happened. As much as he wanted to brush it off and move on, part of him couldn't. The situation had stuck with him more than he'd expected. It wasn't just that he'd been stopped at the door, it was the fact that the guards hadn't recognized him. It wasn't like it hadn't happened before. Over the years, there had been moments when people didn't immediately put two and two together, especially when he wasn't dressed up for a red carpet event or a photo shoot. But this, it felt different. He rubbed his forehead, trying to shake off the feeling. Maybe it was because of the growing divide between the public Keanu, the actor, the action hero, and the private person he tried to be. He didn't want the fame, the hype, or the attention. He didn't want to be known for anything other than the work he did and the person he tried to be. And that was how he'd lived his life, staying low-key, blending in, avoiding the spotlight as much as possible. It worked for him, mostly. But tonight, that quiet, private life felt far away. He walked over to the couch and sank into the cushions, stretching his legs out. The apartment was sparsely decorated, no frills, no flashy items, just a space that reflected his personality. Simple, calm, and unassuming. This was the life he preferred, the life he had chosen. But today's encounter had brought everything to the surface. The uncomfortable reality of being Keanu Reeves, and the strange feeling of being treated like a regular person when that's exactly what he tried to be. The whole situation started to replay in his mind. He could still picture the guards' faces, confused and unsure of what to do. And when the woman had stepped in to vouch for him, Keanu had appreciated it. But something about the whole ordeal still didn't sit right with him. He'd dealt with people not recognizing him before. It was part of living a low-profile life, but this felt different. The guards hadn't given him a chance to explain himself, to prove who he was. They just went straight into security mode, without even pausing to consider that someone might be telling the truth. That's what bothered him the most. The lack of trust, even for a moment, that he was who he said he was. Keanu leaned back, eyes closed, taking a deep breath. He knew he was probably overthinking it, but that's what his mind tended to do. He often found himself lost in thought, dissecting moments and overanalyzing situations. It wasn't the first time something unexpected had shaken him, but it was the first time it had felt so out of place. Just as he was about to get up and take his mind off the whole thing, there was a soft knock at the door. He froze, momentarily caught off guard. Who could it be? He wasn't expecting anyone. He stood up and walked toward the door, peering through the peephole. To his surprise, he saw the concierge looking a little rushed. Keanu opened the door, his curiosity piqued. "Hey, Keanu. I hope I'm not disturbing you," the concierge said with a warm smile, though there was a slight edge to his voice. "I just wanted to come by and apologize for what happened earlier. I heard about the situation with the new security guards. I'm really sorry about that." Keanu smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's all right," he replied, trying to keep it casual. "They were just doing their job. No harm done." The concierge looked at him, clearly relieved that Keanu wasn't upset. "I know, but I felt like I should come over and personally apologize. I can only imagine how frustrating that must have been for you. They're still getting used to the building's residents, and I guess they didn't recognize you." Keanu nodded slowly, appreciating the man's effort to make things right. "It's all right. I understand. I know they're new. But it's just, I don't know. It felt strange, like they didn't believe me. Like I was some stranger trying to get in." The concierge's face softened with understanding. "I get it. You've been living here for years. You're one of the most down-to-earth people in this building. I guess they just don't know you yet. But I'll make sure to speak to them and remind them who the real residents are. We can't have people feeling uncomfortable in their own home." Keanu smiled at that. It was nice to hear someone else acknowledge what had happened. The fact that the concierge was making the effort to address it meant a lot to him. It was one of the small things that made him appreciate the building, even when it had its hiccups. "Thanks," Keanu said sincerely. "I appreciate it." The concierge nodded, then hesitated for a moment before adding, "If there's anything else, just let me know. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. I'll speak to the security team tomorrow, personally." Keanu chuckled softly, feeling the weight of the day begin to lift just a little. "I'm sure it'll all work itself out," he said, feeling a bit more at ease now that someone else was handling it. "No need to make a big deal out of it." "Still," the concierge replied, "it's the least I can do. You've been nothing but kind and respectful to everyone here. We're lucky to have you as a resident." Keanu smiled at the genuine compliment. It wasn't something he often heard, and it was always nice to be appreciated, even for the little things. He had always tried to stay humble and treat others with kindness, whether it was the people he worked with on set or the people who took care of the building he lived in. It was part of who he was, and hearing that it was noticed made him feel good. After a moment, the concierge gave him a final nod. "I'll let you get back to your evening. Just wanted to make sure you knew we're on top of it." And again, I'm really sorry about the confusion. No problem, Keanu said, stepping back slightly to let the concierge leave. Thanks again for stopping by. With that, the concierge turned and headed down the hallway, leaving Keanu standing at the door for a moment. He closed it gently, then leaned against it, taking a deep breath. It felt good to have that small interaction, to know that someone else was willing to take responsibility for what had happened. He wasn't sure if he would forget the awkwardness of the day anytime soon, but it felt better knowing that the situation was being addressed. As the evening went on, Keanu took some time to unwind. He made himself a simple meal, nothing fancy, just enough to satisfy his hunger. He had never been one to indulge in extravagant food or luxury items. His tastes were simple, just like his lifestyle. After eating, he curled up on the couch with a good book, losing himself in the pages as the world outside his apartment continued to buzz and move on. He felt the calm return to his life, the kind of quiet that he cherished so much. It wasn't long before the phone buzzed on the coffee table, interrupting the peaceful silence. Keanu picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was a message from the woman who had helped him earlier, the one who had stepped in when the guards hadn't recognized him. Hey, just wanted to check in and make sure everything's okay now. I know it was awkward earlier, but I hope the rest of your night is going better. Let me know if you need anything. Keanu smiled as he read the message. It was kind of her to reach out, and he appreciated the gesture. He quickly typed out a response, his fingers moving across the screen with ease. Thanks for your help earlier. Everything's fine now. Hope you're having a good evening. He hit send and set the phone down, letting out a contented sigh. The day had been a strange one, but now it was over. The quiet of the apartment surrounded him once more, and for the first time that evening he felt like he could finally relax. Whatever had happened earlier, whatever strange feeling had stuck with him, would eventually fade away. Life would go on, and so would he. The next few days went by without incident. Keanu tried to put the awkward experience with the security guards out of his mind. Life in the building returned to its usual quiet rhythm. The concierge, as promised, had spoken to the security team, and things seemed to smooth out. The guards greeted him more respectfully the next time they saw him, and even gave him a nod as he passed through the lobby. It felt good, that small gesture of recognition, as though the tension had finally broken. But Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Maybe it was because of the way the guards had reacted, or maybe it was just the way his mind worked. He wasn't sure. But something had shifted in the air around him, even though everything seemed to be fine on the surface. Keanu decided to take a break from the building for a while. He didn't want to overthink it all, but the discomfort of the previous week was still lingering in his thoughts. So he packed a small bag, threw on a casual jacket, and decided to take a trip out of town for a few days. He wasn't going anywhere special, just to a small cabin in the mountains he'd rented a few months back. It was a place he could disappear into, a place to recharge and clear his head. The drive was peaceful, just the open road ahead of him and the sound of the car's engine purring steadily. The further he went from the city, the more relaxed he felt. The hustle and bustle of the world seemed to fall away, and for the first time in a while, Keanu felt like he could truly breathe. When he finally arrived at the cabin, the familiar scent of pine trees and fresh mountain air greeted him. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional bird call in the distance. Keanu smiled. This was exactly what he needed. He unloaded his bag and carried it inside. The cabin was small but cozy, with wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, and large windows that looked out onto the forest. He loved how secluded it was. No neighbors, no crowds, just nature, and the chance to be alone with his thoughts. Keanu unpacked his things and then sat on the couch for a while, staring out the window. The peace of the cabin settled over him like a warm blanket, and he started to feel like himself again. He could already feel the stress of the past few days starting to melt away. The situation with the security guards seemed more distant now, like a strange memory that had faded in the quiet of the mountains. As evening fell, Keanu started a fire in the fireplace. The crackling of the wood was soothing, and he sat there for a while, lost in thought. He had always been a fan of solitude. It gave him time to think, to reflect, and there was a lot to reflect on. He thought about the encounter at the building and the strange feeling it left behind. It wasn't just the guards' disbelief. It was the realization that even in a place he considered home, he wasn't as anonymous as he once thought. The world had a way of reminding him that his fame, no matter how much he tried to downplay it, was always just below the surface. He had spent so many years trying to live a low-key life, avoiding the spotlight and the attention that came with being a well-known actor. But moments like these, moments when he felt like an outsider in his own space, made him question whether that was even possible anymore. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up, seeing a message from the woman who had helped him with the security guards. It had been a few days since they'd last spoken, and he hadn't expected to hear from her again. The message was simple but thoughtful. "Hey, just checking in. Hope the peace and quiet of the cabin is treating you well. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Keanu smiled at the message. It was kind of her to check in. She had been so gracious when she'd helped him with the security issue. He hadn't had the chance to properly thank her for stepping in, and he felt like now was as good a time as any to express his appreciation. He quickly typed a response. "Thanks for checking in. The cabin's great, really peaceful, and I just wanted to say thanks again for your help the other day. It meant a lot to me." He hit send and set the phone down on the coffee table, leaning back against the couch. For a few moments he let his mind wander, but soon his thoughts drifted back to the idea that had been lingering in the back of his head, the feeling of being an outsider in his own life. It was a strange thought, but one that seemed to pop up whenever he took time to reflect. Maybe it was the price of fame, he thought, the constant tug between wanting to live a simple private life and being constantly reminded of the world's expectations. He stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the darkening sky. The stars were starting to twinkle in the distance, and the air was cool and crisp. He felt small in the vastness of it all, and for the first time in a while it felt comforting. Being here in the quiet of the mountains reminded him that life didn't always have to be complicated. Sometimes it was okay to just let things be, to let the world move on without him for a while. The next morning, Keanu woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside. He stretched and rubbed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun filtering through the cabin windows. It was the kind of morning he loved, peaceful and quiet with no demands or expectations. He brewed a pot of coffee and sat by the window, sipping slowly and watching the sun rise over the trees. It was a simple pleasure, but one he didn't take for granted. After breakfast, he spent the day walking through the woods, taking in the fresh air and clearing his mind. He didn't have any specific plans, and that was exactly what he wanted. The mountains were a place where he could leave all his worries behind. The people in the city, the endless attention and the constant pressure to be someone other than who he was, all of it faded away here. It was just him, the trees, and the sky. Later in the afternoon, Keanu returned to the cabin and decided to take a nap. He lay down on the couch, his eyes closed, listening to the sounds of the wind outside. His mind wandered once again, and this time he found himself thinking about the future. He wasn't sure what he wanted or what direction he should go in. But that was okay, he thought. Sometimes it was enough to just be in the moment. The future could wait. As the days passed, Keanu settled into a rhythm of relaxation. He cooked simple meals, read a bit, and enjoyed the solitude. There were no interruptions, no questions about who he was or what he had done. It was just peace, and for now that was all he needed. Eventually, Keanu knew he'd have to return to the city, to his home in the building where everything had happened. But for now, he wasn't thinking about that. He was here in the mountains with nothing but time to himself, and in that moment that was enough. After a few days in the mountains, Keanu felt like a new person. The quiet solitude had worked wonders on his mind. He was relaxed, at peace with himself, and ready to return to the city. The time away had given him a fresh perspective on everything, including the situation with the security guards. He realized that while he couldn't control how others saw him, he could control how he responded, and he had learned that sometimes all it took was a little patience and understanding to smooth things over. On the drive back to the city, the familiar landscape of the highway stretched out in front of him. He felt grounded, his thoughts more clear than they had been in weeks. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he was okay with not having all the answers. He knew he had to take life one step at a time, and that was enough. When he finally returned to the building, he noticed a change. It wasn't dramatic, but it was there. The tension that had been present in the air a week ago had disappeared. The guards, though still doing their job, seemed more relaxed around him. It was as if the incident had served as a reminder for everyone to remember the simple truth. No matter who you were, you deserved respect and kindness. And that was something Keanu had always tried to live by, treating people with kindness, regardless of who they were or what they did. As he walked into the lobby, one of the guards gave him a nod, a gesture of recognition that felt genuine this time. Keanu returned the nod with a smile, grateful for the small change. It wasn't about fame or status, he thought. It was about being seen as a person first, not as someone with a label attached to their name. That's what he wanted, and slowly it seemed like that's what he was getting. Keanu made his way to the elevator, pressing the button and waiting for it to arrive. He felt lighter, like the weight of the world wasn't on his shoulders anymore. It was a small thing, the way the guards had shifted their approach, but it made a difference. It reminded him that even in a world that could often be overwhelming, there were moments when things could feel normal again. When the elevator doors opened, Keanu stepped inside and pressed the button for his floor. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment as the elevator ascended. The quiet hum of the machinery filled the space, and Keanu found himself lost in thought again. The mountain retreat had been exactly what he needed, but it also made him realize that the world would keep moving, no matter how much he tried to retreat from it. He couldn't escape the attention forever, but maybe he didn't have to. The elevator came to a stop and the doors slid open with a soft chime. Keanu stepped out into the familiar hallway of his building. It was a quiet place, just like he liked it. He walked down the hallway to his apartment, his mind still spinning with the lessons he had learned during his time away. He wasn't sure if they would stick, but he was hopeful. He had learned to let go of the little things that used to bother him, to focus on the present instead of overanalyzing everything. When Keanu opened the door to his apartment, the same calm, peaceful atmosphere greeted him. He smiled as he stepped inside, feeling a sense of home wash over him. The silence was comforting. There was no rush, no pressure. He could take his time, settle back into his life, and just be. The next few days were filled with small, everyday moments. Keanu ran errands, caught up on some reading, and even took a walk through the park nearby. He still felt the effects of the time in the mountains, the clarity, the peace, but life in the city had its own rhythm. He had to adapt to it again, find balance between the quiet and the noise. One morning, a few days after his return, Keanu was sitting at his kitchen table, drinking coffee, when his phone buzzed. It was a message from the concierge, the same person who had apologized to him after the security incident. "Good morning, Keanu. I hope you're settling back in okay. Just wanted to check in and see if everything's still good on your end. If you need anything, don't hesitate to let me know." Keanu read the message and smiled. It was nice to know that people were still looking out for him, even after everything that had happened. He appreciated the gesture. He quickly typed a response. "Thanks for checking in. Everything's good, and I really appreciate you taking the time to make sure things are okay. It means a lot." He hit send and set the phone down. There was something reassuring about the fact that the people around him were trying to create a sense of community. It wasn't about being a celebrity or having wealth. It was about making sure that everyone, regardless of their background, felt respected and valued. And that was something Keanu valued deeply. A few hours later, he received another message, this time from the woman who had helped him at the building. "Hey, Keanu. Just wanted to check in again and make sure everything's going smoothly now. I know it was a bit of a chaotic situation at the time, but I hope it's all behind you now." Keanu smiled as he read the message. She had been kind to him, stepping in when she didn't have to, and he appreciated her thoughtfulness. He quickly replied, "Thanks again for everything. Things are definitely better now. I really appreciate you stepping in when you did." As the days went on, Keanu started to realize something important. He had spent so much of his life trying to avoid the spotlight, trying to blend in and keep things simple. But he also understood that sometimes it was okay to let people see the real him, the person behind the fame, the one who just wanted to live quietly and peacefully. He didn't need to hide who he was, and he didn't need to apologize for it either. People would either accept him or they wouldn't, and that was okay. The more he thought about it, the more Keanu realized that life wasn't about constantly running from the world or trying to escape its expectations. It was about finding a balance, a way to exist in both worlds, the one where he could be himself and the one where people had certain ideas about who he was. And so, With that realization in mind, Keanu decided to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. He wasn't sure what the next chapter of his life would look like, but he was ready for it. He had learned valuable lessons from the experience, lessons about trust, respect, and the importance of staying true to himself. As Keanu sat by his window later that evening, watching the city lights twinkle below, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for a long time. The world around him could be chaotic, unpredictable, and overwhelming. But he was okay with that now. He had learned that no matter how hard things got, he could always find his way back to himself. For the first time in a long while, Keanu felt like he was exactly where he needed to be.